welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, and today I will be doing the penalty phase of Anthony Pardon's trial. So the opening statement from the prosecution, they just go over witness testimonies and the evidence against Anthony, and then they start telling the jury about Anthony's prior conviction. That happened on the 11th of May in 1982 for attempted murder, and this is now admitted as part of evidence. Then they go through the aggravating circumstances and then go over mitigating circumstances, which the state say there are none. Then the defence, they show his conviction photo. And then they say that one of his teachers from school will be testifying, and something that she will say is that things could have been so different for Anthony. And then they say that Anthony was put in one of the worst prisons in Ohio. He was in prison until he was 41 years old, and then less than a year later he was back in again. And then his lawyer says that all Anthony's decisions were made for him from birth. So at this point the state rests its case. They're having no witnesses up for this penalty phase, so it's all down to the defence now. And the first person up is Barbara Gesserman, and she worked at the school where Anthony attended, and she was a kindergarten teacher, and he ended up going to her for help, which you will find out later on in this testimony. Anthony had some disruptive problems in his classroom, meaning his behaviour wasn't very good. So Anthony would go to Barbara, as I said, who is a kindergarten teacher, and she would help him through the day for half the morning and the afternoon. At that time Anthony lived with his parents, as his mother was in prison for prostitution. Anthony would listen to the children read in kindergarten and help them with math and any other activities that were going on. Her and other teachers came up with a plan to help Anthony learn, and there was a time where child services were putting Anthony back with his mother as she was out of prison, and he would be moving to a different school. Barbara did actually try and stop him being moved, because obviously things were working for him there. The programme that they had got made specifically for him was actually working, so she didn't want him moving and it being messed up, but unfortunately it was out of her hands, and she knew that him moving to this different school, the programme would not be carried on as it was for the school he was actually at with Barbara, and he wouldn't actually get the same support. So the cross-examination, and Barbara says she hasn't seen Anthony in over 45 years, and she didn't actually teach him in kindergarten. He just went to her class in kindergarten to be helped by her. The redirect: Anthony was with her from autumn to spring, and after he'd left that school he never went back. So the next witness is Judy Watson, who is Anthony's cousin, or was more like his big sister. There's no filming with her. She knows Loretta Pardon, who is Anthony's mother. She lived in the same home, and Anthony's father, Eric, lived there too. When she was small, about 7 years old, she saw Eric physically abuse Loretta. Now this is a running story through this penalty phase. She says Loretta loved her children, but it was hard with her getting beat all the time. And Judy lived with them while she was pregnant. One day Loretta told Judy to tell Eric she had gone to look for a job, but when he went to check the closet, all her belongings had gone, and Eric was obviously upset. The next day, Eric had come home with swollen hands. Eric had found Loretta and she believes he beat her and he had taken her money. She never saw Eric beat his kids. So, next witness is Deborah Pardon, Anthony's sister, and no filming again. And you can tell when she starts talking that she is very upset. You know, she's testified against her brother and is now up in his defence for the penalty phase to try and help him not get the death penalty. So I can imagine her head is all over the place despite her part in this crime. You know, she's been put in a very difficult position, and yes, she put herself there. But yeah, so they obviously grew up in the same household. There was drugs, alcohol, and beatings when they were growing up. She says it was dysfunctional, and it's a word she uses a lot through this testimony. And she says her mother was really never there. They just needed guidance and they never got any. She says there were no hugs or being told that they were loved. They just got beat all the time. Her mother left them for 2 to 3 years with their father, aunts and grandparents, and foster care. At one point they lived with just their mother, and Deborah learned how to get into trouble and how to use stolen credit cards. They moved around a lot with their mother, and she says it was every 6 months or so. And Deborah has 4 brothers and 1 stepsister, and all of them have been in prison and done drugs and drank alcohol. Deborah is the only one that graduated high school, and she says that she's failed her own child. She's been in prison twice, and she started drugs at 25, and she blames it all on the lack of confidence. Deborah says that her mother ruins the lives of those involved with her, that she didn't care. Eric would beat them with anything he could get his hands on, like golf clubs, and he was an alcoholic. Albert Bohannon was their mother's boyfriend, and he gave them somewhere to live, and this was when Deborah was young. Deborah saw Eric beat her mother, and she could understand why Eric beat her mother because he gave her money to pay the bills, but she didn't, and she would leave them with no power, no electric or anything. But nobody deserves to be beat for that. Weird that she said that, really weird, but it just goes to show that it's what she's grown up with, and you know, if she can understand why her mother got beat, then you know, it's kind of had a detrimental effect on her. So the cross-examination, yeah, she now is working and looks after her grandkids, who are 8 and 5, and she lives at the house that was searched for the trial. Albert, her mother's boyfriend, stuck around for a while and even offered Anthony a job when he got out of prison. Albert had his own company. The lawyer then asked Deborah about her telling the lawyer that Anthony was manipulative, and Deborah would not agree. So there was a bit of to-ing and fro-ing and sidebars, because, you know, the state was trying to say that she actually did say that to them, but she wouldn't admit to saying that he was manipulative. I don't know if it was her wording and them interpreting it as she was saying he was manipulative, but she didn't actually say those words. And obviously, because she's taken a plea deal, she has got to be truthful, you know, otherwise she's going to get sent to prison. So the lawyer rewords the question and asks her that Anthony made her feel like she was the one that got Anthony in trouble because she used the credit card, but she says she didn't feel bad because of what Anthony said. She felt like that on her own, so she still wouldn't admit Anthony was being manipulative. Then the lawyer actually tells her that it was in fact her that told her it wasn't her fault. So she told the lawyer it wasn't her fault. Deborah wouldn't admit that Anthony was manipulating her, and it was left at that. I think she kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Put across that, you know, she was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. She'd been up and testified against him, so I don't know if she kind of thought this was her chance to make up for that and not make him out to be such a bad guy. Next is Loretta Pardon, Anthony's mother, and she's not being filmed either. Anthony's father, Eric, died in 2010. Albert was Loretta's, she says he was a friend for 27 years. She says she never left her children to go live with Albert. She says she probably could have gone to more school events, you know, as in supporting her children. She says Anthony was tested, I'm presuming because of the behavioural difficulties, when he was 8, because he was having, you know, problems at school. But Loretta noticed the difficulties he was having in kindergarten. But she kind of waited because she thought he was just being a boy, which is fair enough because boys can be extremely hyper and naughty. So you kind of wait to see if they grow out of it and settle down. She witnessed Anthony's father beat him, and the first time was when he was 5. He had bruises because of the beating. She talked to Eric and tried to hug Anthony, but Eric wouldn't allow it, and she said she waited until Eric left. Eric beat her too for pretty much anything. She had black eyes, broken nose, and he beat her with a tyre wrench. And that time she spent 5 days in hospital. All the kids witnessed Eric beating her, and sometimes he would beat the kids and then beat her. She was 16 when she had her first child and 24 when she had her last, and she has 6 kids in total. They ask her if she knows what Anthony's favourite colour is. She doesn't. But she does say he likes to box, and says he got an education in prisons. He's a licensed barber, a licensed plumber, and a licensed electrician. She said Eric drank every day, and there's a story about when Loretta shot at Anthony, literally with a gun. But she said the gun didn't go off, and what had happened is he had picked up a brick and threatened to smash the window, so she threatened him with a gun. Loretta had once left, and Albert had got her a motel room, but Eric found her. He got her in the car, and that's when he beat her with the tyre wrench until she passed out. Loretta had been using her niece's credit card, I'm presuming without permission. She says she doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke or take drugs, she just forged checks and used stolen credit cards, and said she could have been Al Capone's right-hand woman. She doesn't get on with her eldest daughter because she uses drugs, and that daughter has also accused her stepfather Eric of molesting her. Obviously he's dead, so... The first time Anthony was sent to prison, she didn't go because he was a juvenile and she thought he wasn't going to be in there long. But obviously he got bound over and tried as an adult. She said she failed her son as well as social services, his family and the legal system. Anthony was put on Ritalin when he was younger, and he was on it for 2.5 years, but she took him off it because it made him like a zombie. Loretta is bipolar and schizophrenic and is on medication for anxiety amongst others. She takes a pill to help her sleep. So next we are on to Bob Stinson, and this testimony takes up the rest of the day and into the next day. It is an extremely long testimony, and he is a forensic psychologist, so He's actually spoken to Anthony and come up with a diagnosis of his own. But Bob has also graduated law school, and he was asked by the defence to do an evaluation on Anthony. So he's done a big presentation about how he does his evaluation, psycho-legal issues, about choice, about methods of evaluation, and the over 8 hours is how many hours he spent with Anthony and his family. Even though he had 3,000 pages of records, there was still a lot missing, like the children's services reports and school records. Then they show an overview of his findings of Anthony, and he mentions antisocial personality disorder and his addiction to alcohol, and Bob believes he was failed by everyone, which is what his mother said as well, and this is the angle that they're going for. Anthony didn't have a normal upbringing, it was dysfunctional. I mean, yeah, it sounds extremely dysfunctional. Anthony never got the psychiatric help that was recommended. He never got sex offender treatment, even though he requested it the first time he was in prison. Again, there was a lot of systemic failures in his life. Anthony has been incarcerated for approximately 35 years of his life. Because Anthony was in prison at 17, his brain was still developing at that point, so being in prison will have influenced that. I don't know how true that is. All Anthony has ever known is dysfunction, apart from the time when he was living with his grandparents and obviously Barbara helping him at school. Then he goes on to speak about insufficient parental structure. He's never evaluated someone whose whole family has been locked up at the same time. He says Anthony was abused and neglected, so he was 5 times more likely to be arrested as a juvenile and 2 times more likely to be arrested as an adult. And Bob says that Loretta shouldn't have just stopped Anthony's Ritalin. I'm presuming it's that type of drug where you need to be weaned off it and speak to a doctor before you do so. Then going over adverse childhood experience, which are called ACEs. And he says Anthony had 9 out of the 10 ACEs. An abusive father, neglectful mother, family history of mental health problems, drug and alcohol use. And Anthony told Bob he was raised by the state. All his family, extending to aunts, uncles, cousins, had or have drug and alcohol problems. Loretta has been to prison twice. Anthony and one of his brothers were in prison together, and they actually shared a cell, which Bob says he's never heard of before. Then we go back to the ACEs that relate to Anthony and what happened and the meaning of physical abuse. Then we go through emotional abuse, sexual abuse, which Anthony says he was touched by his choir teacher, and his sister's boyfriend was tried to force Anthony into anal sex. Emotional neglect, mental illness, his mother treated violently, divorce or separation, incarcerated relative, substance abuse, and an ACEs diagram of how many of the criteria Anthony has met. And again, pointing out extremely dysfunctional upbringing. I mean, it's a crazy upbringing. I can't imagine, really. But, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have had just as bad a childhood as he has and hasn't gone out to murder somebody. So, that's the end of day 1. I will be back next time with day 2. So until then, bye for now.